What's up, guys? Welcome back to another video. In this video we're going to be talking about God and surrendering to God and what it really means to surrender to God. And I think a lot of people think that like God is just there to give them blessings and do whatever for them, but the thing is, like, it doesn't like go like that how people expect it to go with God, where it's just like, people expect to, in a sense right now, anyway, like people kind of expect it to be really easy and like they don't have to change at all, even though they're very, in the darkness and they don't have any light inside. And surrendering to God in general, when you're walking with God and you're on that path, it means that when you submit and surrender, it's like when He does His orchestration and arrangements for your life and situations and people and things come into your life and circumstance, you have to be able to like be adaptable and be in these situations and accept them when you're in them, so that you're not like bothered by them. It's natural that we have feelings and moods and everything that come up in different circumstances, and that's kind of the point sometimes. Like God makes you kind of like through these various circumstances like think about what your moods and feelings are like, what kind of like, in a sense, corruptions do you reveal in your life, what kind of like bad things and dark things do you kind of reveal in these situations, and like you can take notice of these and change because of this, because you can understand stuff like, okay, I did this thing wrong, or I made this mistake, or I did this and that, like that's what it is to kind of surrender your battles and in a sense let God do His thing for you and your life, because God is just trying to spread His love in a variety of ways. Like you might feel like hardship is not love, but it's love in the way of like He changes us from the inside out. And once you change your inner work and you do your inner work for your inner reality, your outer reality also changes alongside that, and everything is a reflection of your inner reality. And it's so important to let God handle your life and submit to it if you're willing to walk with God. Because if you're still resisting when you're walking with God with these like arrangements or orchestrations, you're gonna have a really bad time, because you're always going to be upset and everything else when you're walking with God, and that's not the point, because God is trying to set you up for a great life. But God can't lead you to a great life if you're not willing to bear hardship and actually do what you're supposed to and ought to do with God, and change alongside the journey and do your thing. Because a lot of times, for example, for me, if I talk about my own experience, like with surrendering, it's like I might have a really bad circumstance maybe come up in my like flesh experience, or it's like, if I feel like, maybe I feel a bit upset or something like that, that's kind of when you have to also rebel against your flesh and yourself, in a sense, a little bit from the soul level, and understand that it is like God's arrangement or orchestration for you to learn something and to go through an experience. And sometimes what might feel like a bad experience at first sight is actually maybe even like a dream for you in a weird way. Like God sets, in a very perfect weird way, He sets up things for us that we can't really understand at the time, till like maybe later sometimes, or hours later after it happens, when it has happened. And then we can kind of understand afterwards like why it happened. And that's like what surrender is, really just being able to accept when these situations come up and work with them, and accept whatever comes your way, whether it's like ups and downs, and going through it and being able to change and work with God on yourself and your highest self, so that you can become that highest self. And that's really what it's all about. It's just being able to handle those situations when they do come up and not fighting against it. That's the worst thing you can do, is because that's really what's going to make you really upset, is when you fight against and resist God and His arrangements or orchestrations for you. And that's really where the problem comes up, is when you're not submitting to the situations as kind of flowing with life, in a sense. If you just flow with life and you're adaptable and you find this inner stillness and peace, you're going to be able to reach the point where it's not going to bother you in the same way that it did before. The more you go on, the more you do your inner work, the more you find that peace and joy within. These small circumstances and events don't really bother you anymore. And you're going to be able to submit to God very easily, and you're going to have that better relationship built with God, and then you understand God better. When people live your life, your marriage fails, whatever, you lose your job, it might be a blessing in disguise, all of these things. Maybe that person was actually bad for you, or was not meant to be with you, or maybe that job was bad for you and you're meant to do something else and it's not what God ordained for you. And This is a lot of times like God has an interesting way of leading us to where we need to go, and it's hard and it might feel overwhelming at times, but you need to just go through the process and just understand that when you go through that inner work process and walk with God, it's gonna get better and better every day. And months later you're gonna notice, damn, like I'm so much better now, I feel so much better, and I can submit to God, and he has these great arrangements and orchestrations for me, whether it's ups and downs, and I'm developing and changing very much, and you start understanding God and why he's doing certain things in your life. And you don't always understand what's exactly happening, but you understand why it's happening in a sense, and what you can take away from it the more you experience with God on your journey and path in faith. And that's really the most important thing about surrendering, is just understanding this perspective of where God is coming from with these things, and understanding how important it is for you to surrender your battles and surrender to God, basically, so you can live your life happily and freely and in peace, and you don't have to think about all these things all the time. And you're gonna end up resisting God if you're not willing to submit and surrender to God. So it's very important on your faith journey, especially early on. The earlier you can kind of get to this stage, the easier it is for you to develop and change. Not that you won't have hardships, but you're still gonna like be more, you could say, chill in those hardships, because you're not trying to resist God. And when you let the flow happen, it's gonna be much easier to get to the other side. You're not delaying anything or making a ton of mistakes too much. And this way, and once you surrender to God, you can then get to the point where you have surrendered and submitted to God. And through this, you can achieve that highest self. And that's what it was for me in my experience when I was on my journey with God here, and I still am. But I would say, like, at this point, I'm at the point where I feel really good, and I feel really peaceful and joyful, and I'm able to submit to any circumstance. I find myself in everybody goes through tough times, and it's important to notice that in your life. Thank you for watching. If there's a this way, God bless. Amen. Donations in the description, 101 in the description as well. Thank you for watching.